So in 2008, I was making this documentary about the hypocrisy of the westernized Arab society, about the stuff that we hide and push under the rug, the fact that we have gay people, etc. And I was pitching it to anybody who would listen outside in the Western world, like people in New York. I would just find like emails of producers, documentary producers in New York, in LA, also here in Europe, in Amsterdam. And the idea was that please take me, please accept me. I'm not like the other Arabs. I'm different. I'm evolved. I'm more like you. And because Amsterdam was also known for the IDFA, the biggest documentary festival that happens, so I would come a lot to Amsterdam. And on one of those trips, and this was, by the way, the first time I started visiting Amsterdam as a tourist and partying and doing a lot of drugs and all that stuff. And I remember on one of those trips, I had a date with a guy, a very hot guy. It was a good time. And as it is with us gays, we only ask each other's names and where we're from after the sex. So as we're wrapping up and I'm getting ready to leave, he asked me where I'm from. And I said, I'm Palestinian. And he had a physical reaction to it. He couldn't make eye contact with me anymore. He was like physically repulsed. And I'd never seen anything like this. And you know, if you grow up in the Middle East, you never have that reaction. Yeah, maybe some people don't like each other, but you never have such a visceral reaction from someone just for saying you're Palestinian. And I don't remember his exact words, but he said something to the effect of like, that's not a thing, or... And I would love to sit here and say, oh my God, I had like the cleverest comeback and I put him in his place. No, I didn't say anything. I was like, I don't know. I just like became apologetic that I'm Palestinian because once again, I'd never come across anything like this. So I suppressed it under a polite smile and I just left. But this suppression of who I am and where I come from and suppression of my Palestinianness did not start in 2008. So you can tell it's 2001 because my beard is black. We're going back to 2001 because it's a time in my history when I started to not just repress my Palestinian identity, but it was the first time that I started to think that me being Palestinian is a problem for the West that I try to emulate. And by West, I mean America. Because in 2001, you remember a little thing happened?
2 planes have crashed into the World Trade Center in New York.
There have been a series of terrorist attacks in the United States.
When 9/11 happened, I was working for an ad agency in Dubai, and I remember my dad called me and he's like, turn on the TV, something terrible happened in New York. And he knows how much I love New York. And I remember everyone in the office, we gathered around the conference table, we were all glued to the TV like, what the fuck? And besides the normal shock that everybody experienced, I adored New York. New York was my dream. And I was there that summer to watch Madonna. She was doing her Drowned World Tour, I remember. So I was in love with New York. And I thought New York is the dream, you know, because that's where Madonna went. I know it's so embarrassing to say these things, but... And by the way, my hair was literally like this because I would always straighten my hair. Again, to look like the people in Hollywood. I hated my curly hair. I would kill for my curly hair now. But... So anyway, so I'm watching 9/11 and it's all like crashing down. But the contradiction about me being Palestinian while watching this Nahar came up when all the mainstream news channels started to show this clip of Palestinians cheering for 9/11. And this was before social media, of course. So we get the news from the mainstream news channels. And they were all showing, all the American mainstream channels, they were all showing that same clip of Palestinians cheering for 9/11. It's also very curious and interesting how all the news channels received the same clip to show. It was almost like they were in unison or something. And in completely unrelated news, the Second Intifada was happening around that time. And that portrayal of Palestinians, like Palestinians are such savages, that justifies the violence that Israel was inflicting on Palestinians during that time. But anyway, I was watching this and I'm like, oh my God, why are these Palestinian people cheering for New York? My New York is falling apart. And obviously I don't feel that way. And no human being, you know, relishes in the death of people like that. And those contradictory feelings towards America did not start then. I learned that stuff from my dad. Because my dad, who was justifiably angry at America, especially the foreign policy in our region, he was also very proud when I got into the Lebanese American University. He would tell everyone, look at my son, he's in the American University. Look, my son speaks like they talk in the movies. And when I was working in advertising and having international brands, look, he works for American brands. It was like... So this anger mixed with the inferiority complex towards the United States is something that is very common in our part of the world. And I'm sure many other countries. And my dad embodied that. You want to meet my dad, don't you?
Respect. There is no sense in a tug of war over common ground.
Real.
There are 12 million Jews in the world, driven from their homeland, subject to Holocaust, and yet here you are. If you can do this,
برافو كلينتون حافظ الدور.
after 4,000 years, you can make this peace. Believe me, you can.
روح يا بلا بيس بلا بطيخ. The thing I remember most about my dad is him watching the TV, cursing the hell out of America. Because what's interesting with my dad is that he studied political science at the University of Jordan. So his opinions were always informed by the geopolitics, not the hatred of Jews. It was never like Jews did this. It was always America did this to us. And before that, it was Britain who did this to us. In the 1930s, before the Holocaust, it wasn't Zionist militias that destroyed the Palestine liberation movements. It was the British Army, Royal Air Force, more than 100,000 British troops that crushed the Palestinians on behalf of the Zionists. So sure, maybe the Zionist dream means something to some Jewish people, that it's their homeland. That's all good and well. But in reality, on the ground, Zionism is land theft. Plain and simple. That's why I find it very funny when people defend, oh, but Zionism means something else to me. That's like a child saying, but I did it because I love those children. No, it doesn't matter what was in your heart. What matters is what you're doing. But anyway, I say all this to say that what I learned from my dad is to focus on the politics of it, the geopolitics, not Jews against Muslims. It was drilled in me very early on. And by the way, before we go on, my dad would like to thank the new members to the channel and the people who donated. So شكرا لكل اللي حطوا super thanks على الفيديو القديم وكمان للnew members, welcome. And by the way, the reason my dad studied political science, because he was so good at school, but he didn't have much in the way of choices for what to pick, because he grew up in refugee camps, but his dream was to become a doctor. But he couldn't afford to go to school for medicine. But he did get a scholarship, but that scholarship was conditional, that he had to study political science. So he studied political science, and I think it made him even more bitter and resentful, because you understand how it works. And basically how his life and his family's life were destroyed. So my memories of dad is this very, like not an angry man, but very bitter. Very like, oh, f my life, you know, kind of a thing, and just cursing at the TV. And like many Palestinians who establish lives outside, you know, in the richer Arab states like Dubai and in the Gulf, they want to start better lives for their children. So they shelter their children. So we grew up in a very sheltered way. I mean, of course, we knew we're Palestinian, but we were living, you know, a happy Dubai life. You know, everything was great. We shop. And so when I would see my dad like cursing at the TV, I'm like, Dad, get over it. Like Zionism is sexy. Okay. And I'll have you know, Madonna studying Kabbalah. All right. By the way, Madonna was studying Kabbalah, which is like an esoteric offshoot of Judaism. So it's like Jewish mysticism, which is all good and well. But what's very suspicious about that is that Kabbalah became very popular in the 90s with celebrities. And I remember Madonna got an Israeli manager somewhere in the 90s, Guy Ozeri. And after that, she started getting very interested in Kabbalah. And all her pictures would be taken outside the Kabbalah Center in London, the Kabbalah Center in New York. It's giving Scientology, babe. Yeah, that's what it's giving. And she was wearing this red bracelet, which I started wearing because Kabbalah's cool. All right, Dad. Like literally, get over it. Literally. By the way, I was obsessed with the word literally because I was obsessed with sounding as American as possible because I was obsessed with anything Hollywood. And when you happen to be an Arab who's obsessed with Hollywood, you internalize everything that Hollywood taught you about your own people. Speaking of which, by the way, there's a very funny video of an Arab guy trying to learn the word literally from an American girl. It's like a live and she's teaching him. So she's going like, literally. He's like, literally? She's like, literally, literally, literally. It's hilarious. But this obsession with America and shame about my Arabness manifested itself in being ashamed of my dad. But I was actually ashamed of my dad because he didn't earn a lot of money and he was like embittered and all these things. And that shame translated into shame about Palestine. And because I accept everything that Hollywood gives me, shame about Palestine suddenly became shame about Islam. Because in my mind, they're linked because that's what Hollywood says. It sounds so pathetic when you list them like as bullet points right after each other. It's very simplistic, but this is the truth. And I was so ashamed of my Islamic background and upbringing that I remember one of my cousins, a younger cousin, I had gone to Lebanon to study and I'd come back. And when I came back, she was wearing the veil, the headscarf. And instinctively, I just ripped it off her head. I was like, no, we're cool Arabs. We don't do stuff like that, you know? Like, we don't... It's... You're literally disgusting. Literally. But let's skip ahead to a time when I started to see the cracks in the way the West sees us as Muslims and how unfair it is. That the problem is in how we're portrayed, not in us. So 2014, if you remember, was one of the times that Israel was bombing Gaza.
We've already taken the windows out of this side of the building.
And at the time, the Israeli Prime Minister was visiting Amsterdam, and there was a protest organized against his visit. The protest was to tell the Dutch government, don't receive such a terrorist here, right? And my friend at the time, who was a Lebanese guy and his Dutch boyfriend, told me, let's go to the protests. And keep in mind, I grew up in Dubai. We don't protest in Dubai. Dubai is not like a militant country. She does not go to the street and scream. No. I'm like, no, I don't know. I'm scared. What happens? Like, do people fight? I mean, that's not... My friend was like, no, nobody fights. This is organized by the police. It's just a protest. It's a peaceful protest. Just come with us. And something inside me was like, I don't know. And the protest was happening outside the synagogue because that's where the Israeli Prime Minister was visiting. Because, by the way, this is something that Israel does when it covers up its crimes with Judaism. It visits the synagogue and the Holocaust Museum, knowing fully well that the protest is going to take place outside those sacred places, and then they can point and say, look, this is anti-Semitic. They know what they're doing. So we get there to the protest, and I'm already telling my friend, I don't want to be here, no, I don't like it. Because in the front line, of course, were like kind of very emboldened Dutch, white people fighting for Palestine and being really aggressive. I was scared. I'm like, what are they saying about Israel? Like, can't they tell that I look like a terrorist and I'm standing right next to them? No, I'm scared. And at the time I used to smoke a lot of pot, like a wake and bake, girls, which makes a paranoid person even more paranoid. So I'm like, I'm gonna stand in the back. I don't want to scream. I don't want to do anything. And my friend was like, just relax. We'll be here and then we'll go. So we're standing. And I could see one of the security people looking at me. And even though he was dressed in civilian clothing, I could tell he's security because I saw an earpiece. And I'm getting more paranoid because he's watching me. So I'm starting to look more suspicious just because I'm scared. So I'm like, it was, yeah. And I'm telling my friend, this guy's looking at me. He's like, nobody's looking at you. Nobody cares. I'm like, no, he's looking at me. And oh my God, he's looking at me. It just went on for 20 minutes. And by the end of it, I was almost having like a nervous breakdown. I'm telling my friend, okay, I'm going to go. I can't be here. So he's like, fine, I'll call you tomorrow, go. So I go down into the metro station, and sure enough, that guy that I thought was watching me was actually watching me because he ran after me, and the metro can be accessed from 2 points, like one at the beginning of the street, one at the end of the street. So this guy followed me here, and he had called 2 other people who came in from the other exit, and they all just ambushed me. And it was winter at the time, and I was wearing a coat, and they took my hands out of my coat. It took about 20 minutes, which felt like a whole day, of them to figure out that I'm not whoever they were looking for, because they took my social security number and figured out basically that I'm no threat. And at the time, one of them, by the way, was a girl who was, as they were kind of making sure that I don't run away or whatever it is, she was comparing my face to a picture that she had on her phone. Apparently, the night before, somebody was watching the synagogue, and I don't know, the security camera caught him, and somehow that guy looks like me, but he does not look like me. I saw the picture. He looks Arab, but anyway, they're apologetic. They're like, okay, you can go. And the weirdest thing about the whole thing is that they looked as scared of me as I was of them. They genuinely believed that I'm a threat because of my face. You internalize that because someone is looking at you like a threat just because of the face that you have. You can't help having the face that you have. I mean, now you see me with a blonde wig and I'm all like, yes, queen. But without this wig, I'm just like an Arab dude. Okay, bald. Not that Arab guys are bald, but you know what I mean. Like, I don't look like this. And which you're going to see at the end of the video, so stick around. But that experience taught me that my being Palestinian, my being Arab is a problem. Just because. But there's a flip side to that. There's a flip side to being judged for your appearance as an Arab man here in Europe. It's a beautifully distracting flip side, actually. It's basically when you're fetishized for being Arab. And if there's one thing European gay guys love, in my humble experience, it's an Arab guy in bed. She's giving you Arab daddy. She is. By the way, speaking of using sex as a weapon, my new show premieres in September. If you're watching this video after July 3rd, there's going to be a link to the tickets below. And it's a show about intimacy, love, and I'm going to play a drag version of Julia Roberts from Pretty Woman. Girl, it's something. But if you're watching this before July 3rd, you're going to have to wait. But check back again after July 3rd and buy yourself a ticket. But back to your Arabness being weaponized in a sexual way. I'm actually complicit in that myself. I remember I was on a date with a guy who loved that I'm Palestinian. Unlike that other guy that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this guy loved it. So when he asked me, where are you from? I said, I'm Palestinian. He's like, oh my God, that's so hot. Talk to me like a Palestinian. It's like, sir, That's kind of racist.
I'll do it anyway.
And I remember I had another experience. There was a white party, because you know us gays, we love a theme. Basically everyone's supposed to wear white. And you know, the muscled Marys, they came out with their little white shorts and everybody's looking hot and cute. And I decided to go in a dish dash because I don't like to be the center of attention. No, me? Never. I don't like it. I'm demure. I'm an introvert. I am actually, but that's a story for another video. So I go to this party in this white dish dash and no underwear underneath it. No. Sorry, Mom. This is time to turn away from this video. So obviously, understandably, everyone's like, oh my God. And I'm basically playing up my Arabness, you know, selling it basically. Everyone's like, oh, what's underneath that white thing? I'm like, oh, there's one way to find out. Get in here, boys. Literally a whore. Literally. You know, a lot of people have a problem with being fetishized. It's like, oh my God, how dare you fetishize me and objectify me. But if you're going to talk about sex specifically, you being an object is part of the fun. But you have to be in on the game. You can't be used by somebody. But what's really interesting about being fetishized and getting that kind of positive attention, you know, being judged in a positive way, is that it's kind of like it medicates the pain of being judged for being an Arab in the political sense. But this medication wears off as soon as the sex wears off. Because I remember those guys that I would meet at the parties who loved that I'm an Arab guy and oh my God, that's so hot. I would link up with them on social media and Facebook was very big at the time. So I would make all these posts. Every time Israel was bombing the hell out of Gaza, I would be writing these angry posts. And these guys that I met at a party when we were having fun, they're like, oh, what the hell? They would block me. In my head, I'm thinking like, why? Like, don't you see that I'm still the same person that you had fun with the night before? And this confusing game of identity politics when it comes to being a gay Palestinian has been a constant throughout my life. And I'm sure for many gay Arabs who live in Europe and in the US. And it continues until this day. Because if you read the comments from the Zionists on my videos here on YouTube, all of them can be summed up in, but Hamas would throw you off a roof. Go be gay with your nail polish and your gay hand movements or whatever. What's very interesting about that is they don't realize how homophobic they are. Because I've been cross-dressing on the internet for 3 years. And never have I ever gotten a negative comment. I don't know how. I think I'm just lucky that way. I never got homophobic, violent, aggressive comments. Until I started talking about Palestine and Zionists entered the picture. These people, it's like, you do realize you're the only one who's talking about this, not Hamas. And speaking of Israelis using gayness as a weapon against Palestinians, and as a propaganda tool to paint an image of Israel, of this colonial entity, as something positive. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned the documentary that I was working on in 2008 about exposing the double standards of a westernized Arab society, right? But the narrative arc, the main story in that documentary was me coming out as gay to my family and friends in Dubai. And the main message of the film is that I was an oppressed gay man in the Middle East and oh West, please save me, please take me. Because it was kind of like my ticket to move. Basically the idea is that I, like many gay guys in the Middle East, were always aware that our homosexuality basically could be a ticket out. Because that's what the West likes to believe, that they can save us from our horrible environments, right? And I was pitching this documentary, it was still in development, right? And one of the companies that picked it for development was an Israeli company. If you're familiar with the filmmaking world, you know there's a lot of these kind of like script labs or film labs or incubation studios where they help you develop projects. Not only in terms of like narrative and story, but also help connect you to other people. So this company selected, you know, different Middle Eastern filmmakers. And one could say that an Israeli company selecting an Arab filmmaker, a gay Arab filmmaker, trying to help him make his film about being gay and escaping the big bad Arab world could be a pinkwashing tactic of Israel. But at the time, I wasn't thinking that, or I didn't want to think that. Basically, I just wanted my ticket out, right? But I'm sure the Israeli company is just trying to help Arab filmmakers out of the goodness of their hearts. And by the way, what was very complicated about that is that because it's an Israeli company, we couldn't meet in Arab countries. So they were selecting all these Arab filmmakers to help, but we had to meet in other places, right? Like Turkey or Amsterdam. And when I was in Amsterdam, I was approached by a Dutch producer to do the subtitles for a Palestinian film that he was producing. So I met the filmmaker and basically watched her film to start the subtitling, to translate it into English. And this filmmaker, she was a very hardened, angry woman. Her film was angry, the main character in the film was angry, she was angry because she lives in the West Bank, so she's not like a privileged Palestinian like me in Dubai, like loo la 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 la. And in my meetings with this filmmaker, the subject of my documentary came up and she found out that an Israeli company was developing my film. And she got even more angry than she already was. And I was like, what the hell? But I wasn't upset with her, but I had never come across this concept of pinkwashing, that I'm being used. Basically, she was telling me, you're a pawn, this Israeli company is using you to help make themselves look like, help perpetuate this myth of democracy that we all now know is a complete farce. But this was my first time to come up against something like that. And I wanted to talk to her more, but she blocked me. But it's okay, because she was literally feeling the oppression every day. Like, these days in the West Bank, there are people who are choosing to go hungry rather than go to the grocery so that they don't get shot by a settler or even someone from the army or the IDF on their way to get groceries. Literally hell. Literal. It's literal hell. So anyway, back to 2008, I did not cut ties with the Israeli company that was helping me develop the film, because I was still like, oh, maybe they can help get my film through Sundance. Again, Hollywood, America, the lights are calling me. And one of the things that company did is they would put us in touch with reporters and media. And they put me in touch with this, he wasn't a reporter, but he was like some kind of PR person, very dodgy character, who would always Skype with me from his room. His house was always dimly lit and always trying to connect me to media to sell my story as this sad Arab gay man who is being saved, by, gross. But now, keep in mind, the conversation with that Palestinian filmmaker is in my mind. So I'm sabotaging everything that he was doing. He even offered to connect me to Stephen Fry. I don't know if it was real, because this guy, I'm telling you, he was really dodgy. But yeah, one of the things that he supposedly had lined up for me was an interview with Stephen Fry. And I was getting out of everything. I'm like, I don't, because I still could not stand my ground and say, no, I don't want your support. I couldn't really be authentically Palestinian just yet. But the wake-up call came.
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
In the weeks following October 7, I was still making my content on YouTube about Love is Blind, and actually I was working on a video about Chandler Bing from Matthew Perry from Friends, who had just died. I remember there was a vigil held for Gaza here in Amsterdam that I kind of like inserted in the video, almost like very meekly and apologetically, like I wasn't sure, like would I lose subscribers if I talk about this? And at the time, my cousin was visiting me from Dubai, one of my favorite cousins, young guy, but very bright and very politically involved, feels with the Palestinian cause and has felt for years. He'd come to see my show, my drag show. And then he was here for a couple of weeks. And as time was going on, the bombardment on Gaza was becoming too much. And I remember my conversations with that cousin as we were walking around Amsterdam, like, oh my God, almost wanting him to tell me that it's okay that I'm not talking about Palestine on my channel, like asking for forgiveness. I was saying this joke, like they already stole my land, they're not gonna steal my income, like, and my subscribers and my YouTube. And this was, by the way, mind you, like very early November, I would say. So it was just a few weeks into the bombardment of Gaza, which is crazy just to say that. Like, a few weeks is okay. It's okay, it'll pass. They do this every 8 years or so, like mowing the lawn. And I remember my cousin was wearing the keffiyeh while walking around. And my cousin, by the way, has a very thick, black, bushy beard and looks really Arab. And I was deep down inside, I was ashamed that he was wearing it. I wanted him to take it off, but of course, thank God, I wasn't like I was back then when I ripped the headscarf off my cousin's head. So I wasn't gonna do that. I understood that the shame is mine, but I felt very uncomfortable. Well, first of all, beyond the shame, I was also scared. Like, what if some guys decide to beat us up here for, like, because he's wearing the scarf? But at the same time, I was also like, okay, this shame is more than just fear of getting beaten up. You're ashamed of being Palestinian. So I'm just like kind of talking to myself, almost having like inner dialogue, like thinking like, who are you to tell me I should be ashamed? But then the longer it went on, and I'm not even talking about right now when we are 10 months into this thing, even in January and February, like after 5 months, it was becoming like, okay, you cannot stay quiet. I could not stay quiet about this. And one of the hardest conversations I've had about this was with a friend back in Dubai when I visited in February. And I've mentioned this in my other video. I'm going to link up here if you want to see it. But we still haven't spoken. And now it's almost 5 months in and I still haven't spoken to him. Because you know what it is? I'm afraid to hear one more anti-Palestinian thing from him. And I know I wouldn't be able to talk to him ever again. So I'm kind of like saving our friendship. But then when I think about it, like, is it really a friendship if I can't speak openly with someone? So anyway, eventually I will write him. Or not, I don't know. But the conversation went a little something like, because he presented it like he has an open mind. He's ready to hear any opinion, right? But of course, he wasn't, because he's a big fan of Sam Harris. And if you know Sam Harris...
If we knew we could only let in 200,000 refugees, say, in any given year into the U.S., to learn that this set of 100,000 refugees were all Christians coming from these war-torn areas in the Middle East or in sub-Saharan Africa, well, that would be relevant information. Insofar as we could actually know that they're Christians, that would be good news, because what we're worried about now at this moment in history are the jihadists.
Sam Harris is one of those people that kind of distills this down to a clash of civilization, as if the problem is the deranged Muslims. And even though my friend wasn't using those exact words, that was definitely the subtext. Oh, you know, Islamic terrorism and jihad and all that kind of stuff. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I didn't think this back then, but I know this now. You cannot talk your way out of dehumanization. If someone thinks that you inherently is a problem, yeah, there's no point in debating. It's like begging for you to be seen as equal. But later on, I thought, so let's say what's happening now is because of Islamic terrorism, which it isn't. But let's say this project, this settler colonial entity, started in 1948 when my dad was 2 years old when they were kicked out. There was no Islamic terrorism back then. You know, I've said this in previous videos that my dad grew up in refugee camps, but before this year, I never actually dug deep into what that must have felt like for my dad. Like, what is it like to grow up in a camp, to suddenly have no home? To suddenly be fighting on how you're going to split the sardines between everybody. To always feel like you're a guest wherever you go, an expat. And I feel that too. Like, I feel like I'm a guest everywhere I go. And that's why when I went to that protest that I mentioned earlier in the video as well, when I saw the Dutch lady in the front feeling so emboldened to just scream and say whatever she wants, that's behavior of someone who is in their home. When they take their environment for granted, like they belong here, no one can kick them out. And for me, I'm always scared, like we shouldn't like rock the boat too much, you never know, maybe they'll ask us to leave. So for me, like reconnecting with Palestine and trying to bring Palestine into my consciousness every day is about reconnecting to my dad, reconnecting to my history. And you know, a lot of my friends say, come on, you gotta take care of your mental health, you shouldn't do that. And yeah, maybe so, but I don't feel my mental health is my heart is in pain. And I cry and I feel like the injustice, but I'm not confused in my head. I'm actually having a lot of moral clarity, finally, for the first time. And not in a nationalistic way that I think, oh, Palestine is better than other countries, or I'm gonna root for the Palestinian football team over another one. It's not, I don't take pride in being Palestinian in that sense. But for me, being Palestinian means resilience. Because when I watch what Palestinians go through, and the dignity and the faith that they have, that means like, God damn it, I am Palestinian. I'm like that. Because for me, if you know me personally, like you can never keep me down. I will keep working until I get what I want. And I never give up. If it takes my entire life, bitch. And that's Palestine.
150 kites carrying the Palestinian flag are over the camps here in Khan Yunis.
But what's crazy about all that, by the way, is that my journey to accepting my Palestinianness came through Americans. And maybe you can say, oh my God, that's so sad. You needed Americans to accept you for you to accept yourself. But it actually fits my journey with this worship of America. It makes sense with the inferiority complex that you grow up having, that I grew up having. So when you see lately a lot of Americans waking up, a lot of celebrities waking up, that helps, that matters. Because for me, it's like who I saw was superior to me is now telling me like, hey, no, what you're going through sucks. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. My kings and queens are saying I'm suffering, so I am suffering. Again, it sounds so sad and pathetic, but this is the truth. By the way, speaking of Americans waking up and how I did a complete 180 on loving my Islamic culture, there's a girl, an American girl who's on Instagram, like she converted to Islam, and I'm obsessed with watching her videos. She talks about, you know, bringing Allah into her life and all of that. And she's like, she keeps saying, mashallah, in a very American accent. And I'm like, girl, literally, mashallah, literally. I'm all about it. And you know how the social media algorithm leads you to other similar content. So I've been like obsessed lately with watching European and American girls convert to Islam and wear the headscarf. I'm like, love it, girl. Yes, queen. You better work. And what's interesting about watching these girls for me is they're putting on a veil to become more themselves. It's kind of like what I do in drag. But underneath the veil, underneath the mask, we're actually all the same. But the biggest piece for me that helped me come to that realization is not just Americans, specifically American Jews speaking up for Palestine. I love it. Because nowadays, by the way, the longer this goes on, you can feel people getting tired. Like I have a lot of my friends whom I love, and I'm not like blaming them, but they're like, oh my God, I can't, I need to protect my mental health. I need to focus on other things. And they say it with guilt, which I find very endearing. And it's natural that a lot of people are gonna just like fall to the wayside. They're not gonna have the sustained interest in this. But who's going to be left? It's us Palestinians and Jews. All we have is each other. Because our liberation is intertwined. One cannot be free without the other. And I have actually a very interesting example, and I said it at a speech I gave at a night of protest for Palestine. And I told the story of how Zionism is actually cruel to both Palestinians and Jews, but in different ways. So I said, if Zionism is a pimp, a cruel, abusive pimp, the sad street hooker that gets beaten up every day is obviously Palestine. Everybody can see that. But then, that pimp also has a high-class escort, the Israelis, that thinks the pimp loves her because he buys her all this jewelry, stolen land from Palestinians. He flies her everywhere, birthright trips to ensure demographic majority. But at the end of the day, if she stops the money coming in for him, the business, he will end her life with zero hesitation. If you really want to understand how Zionism treats Jews, just look up the videos of how the Israeli forces treat those Orthodox Jewish rabbis who are pro-Palestine. Just watch, look it up. See how much Zionism loves Jews. Because what you have to understand, Israel physically enslaves Palestinians. Like literally keeps them trapped, controls how much food and water they get. But Palestinians are free in their mind because they see the truth. They're physically enslaved, which sucks, but they're free up here. But Israeli Jews, they're mentally enslaved, so they can't even see it. Zionism has convinced them that Palestinian children need to die in order for them to be safe. That's how cruel and fucked up this whole thing is. And by the way, this video that you're watching is the YouTube version of a show I did on a boat here in Amsterdam. And the way I did it on the boat, I was changing wigs, by the way, in between. As I asked the people to look out, enjoy the canal while I changed the wig. And then we cut to the different timeline. It was beautiful. And the most beautiful thing about it actually was the Q&A that followed the show. Because people were, it suddenly stirred up in them the question of identity, right? And identity politics. And I'll never forget, there was one Iranian girl married to a Dutch guy that she was with on the boat. She said after that when she came to the Netherlands when she was like 12, she pretended her name was Jennifer. She hid the fact that she's Iranian in order to blend in, which is what I was doing with not owning my Palestinian identity, pushing it down and highlighting the gay part of my identity. Because for me, this whole thing is about not only identity politics in this abstract way, but how do we play up certain parts of ourselves in order to feel safer, in order to achieve certain things? Like, how do we navigate that? See, this is me and this is me. Don't take your identity politics so seriously. By the way, I'm thinking of starting a coaching business, creativity coaching, because this whole journey for me, the last few years with drag, has been about like, how do I take the parts that cause me so much pain and make something with them? And this is the first time that I've been successful at something. I've always been ambitious and hardworking, but this is the first time this stuff has clicked. So I'm thinking to start like a coaching business to help people creatively in unlocking the parts of themselves that have been buried for so long. Usually the key to your fulfillment and what you should be doing with your life is in your childhood. And I'm a master at helping you go there. So if you want to go there and you think it's a good idea that I do some creativity coaching and you'd like to work with me on that, let me know in the comments and I maybe will set up a website and we'll start this whole thing. But if there's one takeaway, I want you to remember that even though we're all fighting for Palestine, this is not about Palestinians being better than other people. Because fighting for Palestine is not a fight for an ethnicity. It's a fight for the truth.
Oh no, I won't step aside. I know this land is mine.